Smoke rises over the Montana wilderness as flames devour ancient pines. Deep in these woods, John Cooper breaks his usual morning routine to investigate strange sounds echoing through the trees. What he discovers will change his life forever. A young woman in a torn designer dress, chained to a century-old oak. Her eyes hold secrets darker than the gathering storm clouds, and her last name carries enough weight to crush them both. With minutes to spare before the inferno claims everything, John must make a choice that will echo through generations. This isn't just a story about a rescue, it's about how fate can chain two souls together in the most unexpected ways. Could a desperate escape through burning woods forge an unbreakable bond between a simple farmer and the heiress who never should have crossed his path? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Montana sky in shades of amber and rose as John Cooper laced up his worn leather boots. The morning ritual was as familiar as breathing. Boots first, then the heavy canvas jacket, both bearing the honest marks of years of hard work. From his cabin's weathered porch, he could see the first hints of light touching the wheat fields that stretched toward the distant tree line. The boots had been his father's last gift, handed down 5 years ago, along with the 200 acres of struggling farmland. "Land's got memory, son," the old man had said before cancer took him. "Remembers every hand that worked it, every season that blessed or cursed it." John flexed his calloused fingers, watching his breath mist in the early autumn air. At 35, his face carried the weathered look of someone who spent more time with soil than people. His dark hair, touched with early gray at the temples, needed a trim, but haircuts weren't high on the priority list when you were fighting to keep a family farm alive. The morning chores waited for no man. He moved through them with practiced efficiency, checking the irrigation lines, feeding the handful of horses he kept in the barn, and inspecting the wheat that would soon be ready for harvest. Each step was precise, measured, like the movements of a man who had learned that waste of time, of resources, of energy was a luxury he couldn't afford. Inside the barn, Sarah, his bay mare, nickered a greeting. John allowed himself a small smile as he filled her trough. The horse had been his mother's pride, and now she was one of the few connections he had left to a time when the farmhouse had echoed with more than just his own footsteps. "Morning, old girl," he murmured, running a hand along her flank. The radio in the corner crackled with the day's weather report. High winds expected, fire danger elevated. John's jaw tightened. The summer had been brutal, leaving the land parched and vulnerable. One spark could turn the countryside into an inferno. He was checking the fence line when he first noticed the smoke, just a thin grey ribbon against the morning sky, rising from deep in the forest that marked his property's eastern boundary. Probably campers, he thought, though trespassing had become rare since he'd posted the new signs. Still, with the fire risk so high, the decision made itself. John retrieved his canteen and the old rifle he kept by the door, more for rattlesnakes than people, and headed toward the tree line. The weight of the gun was familiar, though he hadn't fired it since coming back from his second tour in Afghanistan. That was another life, one he'd left behind when his father's illness called him home to the farm. As he approached the forest's edge, something felt off. The birds had gone quiet, and there was a tension in the air that reminded him of moments before ambush in Kandahar. His boots, so comfortable in the soft earth of his fields, moved silently now on the pine-needle carpet. Military training didn't fade, even after 7 years of civilian life. The smoke was thicker now, and he could smell something else beneath the burning wood. Gasoline. Not campers, then. The morning silence shattered with a sound he hadn't expected. A muffled scream, distinctly human, distinctly female. John's body reacted before his mind could process, muscle memory from years of combat taking over. He moved through the trees like a shadow, following the sound. The smoke stung his eyes, and he could feel the heat building. Whatever was happening, he needed to move fast. The forest was a tinderbox, and that gasoline smell meant someone had decided to light the match. Through the gathering haze, he caught glimpses of expensive black SUVs pulling away, their engines barely audible over the growing crackle of flames. Another scream, closer now, mixed with the sound of chains rattling against wood. John Cooper had left war behind for the simple life of a farmer. But as he raced through the burning forest toward that desperate sound, he knew his morning routine was about to become anything but simple. The well-worn boots carried him forward, each step taking him deeper into what would become the most extraordinary day of his life. The woman chained to the ancient oak tree was a stark contrast to the rugged forest around her. Even through the smoke and grime, John could see that her torn dress had once been elegant, the kind of thing he'd only seen in magazines or on TV. A Cartier bracelet, bent and scratched, caught the morning light as she pulled against her. "Restraints! Help!" Her voice was hoarse, probably from screaming. "Please!" John emerged from the tree line, rifle lowered but ready. The heat was building, and he could hear the fire's approaching roar. They had minutes, maybe less. Her eyes widened at his appearance, relief warring with fear. "The key," she managed between coughs. "They dropped it there." She nodded toward a patch of leaves about 10 feet away. 20 seconds of searching revealed a small, silver key. The woman's wrists were raw where the chains had cut into them, but her grip was surprisingly strong when he helped her up. "I'm John Cooper," he said, already calculating their best escape route. The fire was spreading faster than he'd expected. "Victoria Montgomery." She stumbled, and he caught her arm. "And before you ask, yes, those Montgomerys." The Montgomery name carried weight even in rural Montana. The family controlled one of the largest energy conglomerates in the country. Their corporate logo was probably on his electric bill. "You run?" he asked, ignoring the implications of her identity for now. The smoke was getting thicker. She kicked off her ruined designer heels. "I can manage." They ran. Victoria proved tougher than her appearance suggested, keeping pace despite obvious exhaustion and what looked like a sprained ankle. The fire was gaining ground, consuming the dry forest with unnatural speed. "They used accelerant," Victoria said between breaths, "wanted to make sure nothing was left." "Who's they?" "My father's security team, or at least that's who they claimed to be." She stumbled again, and John steadied her. 3 days ago, they said there was a threat against our family. Claimed they were taking me to a safe house. Instead, she gestured back toward the burning forest. A burning branch crashed down nearby, showering them with sparks. John pulled her into a different direction, toward a creek he knew cut through his property. The water might give them a better chance. "Why?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Getting involved in billionaire family disputes hadn't been on his morning agenda. Victoria's laugh was bitter. "Because I found proof. The company's been deliberately contaminating groundwater across 3 states, bribing officials, falsifying reports. I was going to take it public at tomorrow's board meeting. The creek came into view, its usually peaceful burble now competing with the fire's roar. John led them along its bank, away from the worst of the flames. "The USB drive." Victoria suddenly stopped. "My evidence. It's in the bracelet." She twisted the damaged Cartier piece until something clicked, revealing a hidden compartment. A small flash drive fell into her palm. "My father always said I was too idealistic," she continued as they resumed their escape. "Said I didn't understand how the real world worked. Guess he decided to give me a harsh lesson." The implications of her words hit hard. Her own father had ordered this. John had seen enough combat to recognize the calculated brutality of the setup. The remote location, the fire to destroy evidence, the clean escape route for the perpetrators. They reached a wider part of the creek just as a massive pine crashed down behind them, sending up a shower of burning debris. Without hesitation, John led them into the water. It was shallow but cold enough to shock the breath from his lungs. Victoria gasped, but followed his lead, clutching the USB drive tightly. The current helped carry them away from the worst of the fire, though smoke still burned their eyes and throats. "My farm's about a mile downstream," John said. "We can—" The crack of a rifle shot cut him off. The bullet hit the water nearby, sending up a spray. Victoria ducked instinctively, revealing that this wasn't her first experience with gunfire. "Guess Daddy's men are being thorough," she said grimly. John pulled her toward the far bank, where the morning mist and smoke provided better cover. His own rifle was a reassuring weight against his back, though he hoped he wouldn't need it. He'd left violence behind when he came back to the farm. But as another shot kicked up water near them, he realized that violence hadn't left him behind. The simple farmer's morning had become a fight for survival, and the woman beside him, billionaire heiress, corporate whistleblower, target for murder, was now his responsibility. They ran through the shallow water, two strangers bound together by circumstance and pursued by flames, bullets, and secrets that could burn hotter than any forest fire. The creek offered cover, but staying in the frigid water wasn't an option. John could feel Victoria shivering beside him, her bare feet stumbling on the rocky bottom. The smoke was getting thicker, making every breath a struggle. "We need to move to higher ground," he said, scanning the tree line. Another shot rang out, more distant this time. "They're trying to herd us east." "Into the worst of the fire," Victoria noted. Despite her exhaustion, her mind was sharp. "Classic pincer movement." John shot her a questioning look. "I read a lot of military history," she explained. "Know your enemy, right?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "My old drill sergeant would have liked you." They left the creek at a bend, where a fallen tree provided momentary cover. Victoria's feet were bleeding from the rocks, but she didn't complain. John quickly removed his outer shirt, tearing it into strips to wrap her feet. The thin camisole underneath her torn designer dress was barely protection against the morning chill. He handed her his canvas jacket. "We need to move fast." The jacket swallowed her smaller frame, but the relief in her eyes was worth sacrificing his extra layer. They could hear engines in the distance, more SUVs joining the hunt. "Your farm," Victoria said as they started moving again. "Will it be safe?" "Safer than here. I've got supplies, communications." He helped her over a fallen log. "And my own arsenal, if it comes to that." The fire had created its own wind, pulling oxygen from the surrounding forest. The resulting maelstrom of heat and smoke made navigation challenging, but John knew these woods. He'd walked them since childhood, learned their secrets during countless hunting trips with his father. A massive oak crashed down ahead of them, its ancient trunk succumbing to the flames. John pulled Victoria back just in time, the heat searing their faces. The falling tree had revealed something, a glint of metal in the underbrush. "Wait," he said, approaching carefully. Half buried in leaves and dirt was a length of heavy chain, the same type that had bound Victoria to the tree. Next to it lay a drop tactical glove, military grade. "They've been planning this," Victoria said, picking up the glove, "setting up multiple sites. If one failed, they'd have backups." John's jaw tightened. The methodical cruelty of it stirred something dark in his memory. Nights in Afghan mountains, hunting different kinds of predators. They pushed on, moving parallel to the fire line. John's training kicked in fully now, checking sight lines, noting potential cover, keeping them moving in a pattern that would be harder to track. Victoria followed his lead without question, matching his pace despite her injuries. The sound of rotors cut through the fire's roar, a helicopter joining the search. John pulled them under a dense copse of pines, their branches offering temporary concealment. "My father's private security," Victoria whispered. "They've got thermal imaging. Then we use the fire against them." John pointed to where the flames were creating massive heat signatures. "Stay close to the burn line. Their sensors will be useless." They moved again, staying just ahead of the advancing flames while using its heat to mask their presence. Victoria stumbled once, exhaustion finally catching up. John caught her before she fell, and for a moment they were pressed close together. Despite the smoke and fear, he caught a trace of expensive perfume. "Almost there," he said, stepping back. "See that ridge? My property starts just beyond it." Victoria nodded, straightening up. The USB drive was still clutched tightly in her hand, her knuckles white with determination. More shots echoed behind them, closer now. The pursuers were getting desperate. They crested the ridge as the helicopter made another pass. Below them, through the smoke, they could see John's farmhouse, a solid two-story structure with a red barn beside it. Safety was tantalizingly close, but between them and the house lay open ground. No cover, no concealment, just 200 yards of exposed field. "They'll see us," Victoria said, understanding the problem immediately. John studied the terrain, years of tactical training combining with local knowledge. "See that irrigation ditch? Runs all the way to the barn. It'll be muddy, but better than bullets." Victoria was already moving. "Lead the way, farmer." They half slid down the ridge, the heat of the forest fire pushing them forward. Behind them, voices shouted. They'd been spotted. But now they were on John's land, his territory. Here, every dip and fold of the earth could mean survival. The simple morning routine had become a desperate race for life. But as they splashed into the irrigation ditch, John realized that helping this woman wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice, about standing against the kind of people who thought money could buy the right to destroy lives. The farm beckoned ahead, promising sanctuary, but they both knew it was just the beginning of a much longer fight. The farmhouse kitchen was a study in contrasts. Victoria Montgomery sat at the worn oak table, her mud-stained designer dress and makeshift bandaged feet looking alien against the backdrop of rustic simplicity. John moved efficiently around her, gathering first aid supplies from a cabinet that hadn't been updated since his mother's time. "This might sting," he warned, kneeling to clean the cuts on her feet. An old family photograph watched from the wall. John as a child, flanked by his parents, all of them smiling in front of the same barn that now helped hide them from the helicopter's periodic passes. Victoria barely flinched as he worked, though some of the cuts were deep. "You've done this before." Combat medic training. He didn't elaborate, but his hands moved with practiced precision. The army teaches you to be useful in multiple ways. Through the window, smoke still rose from the forest, but the wind had shifted, pushing the fire away from the farm. They could hear sirens in the distance, local fire crews responding at last. "They won't give up easily," Victoria said, her fingers absently tracing the grain of the wooden table. "That USB drive threatens billions in contracts, not to mention prison time for half the board." John finished wrapping her feet and stood, moving to check the perimeter through various windows. The helicopter had disappeared, but that didn't mean they were safe. "Tell me about your father." Victoria's laugh was hollow. "Charles Montgomery Threur, CEO of Montgomery Energy Solutions, public face of clean energy innovation, private architect of environmental devastation." She pulled out the USB drive, turning it over in her hands. "He always told me that real power meant never having to say you're sorry." Sounds like a charming man. He was, actually. That was the worst part. Victoria's voice softened. "He taught me to ride horses, read me bedtime stories, sent me to the best schools. And all the while he was orchestrating the poisoning of entire communities." John retrieved his father's old shotgun from above the fireplace, checking it methodically. "Some people compartmentalize well. I found the evidence by accident," Victoria continued, "was reviewing acquisition reports and noticed discrepancies in the environmental impact studies, dug deeper and found a pattern spanning years, falsified. Data, buried research, paid-off inspectors, children in 3 states with mysterious cancers, all living near our facilities." She stood shakily, moving to the window. The late morning sun caught her face, highlighting scratches from their escape and something else, a deep, bone-weary determination. "I couldn't just let it go. Family legacy be damned." John watched her, noting how she automatically chose a position that gave her multiple escape routes while maintaining cover from external sightlines. Survival instincts, even if she didn't realize she was using them. A glint of metal caught his eye, a small locket around her neck, previously hidden by her dress. She noticed his gaze and touched it gently. My mother's. She died when I was 12. Cancer. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. She always told me that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege. The sound of vehicles on the access road interrupted them. John moved quickly, rifle ready. Back door, he said quietly. If anything happens, I'm not leaving you. Victoria's tone left no room for argument. I've spent my whole life watching people choose the easy way out. Not anymore. Their eyes met, a moment of understanding passing between them. She wasn't just some rich girl playing at rebellion. This was a woman willing to sacrifice everything for what she believed in. John nodded, handing her his backup pistol. Her grip on it was surprisingly confident. Summer camp, she explained, catching his look. Father insisted I learn self-defense, probably regretting that decision now. The vehicles were closer now. Multiple engines, heavy vehicles. John led them to a concealed position with good sightlines of both approaches. Victoria moved seamlessly with him, as if they'd worked together for years instead of hours. Whatever happens, she said softly. Thank you for helping a stranger, for believing me. John checked his ammunition one last time. Sometimes the right thing is the only thing. Their shoulders touched as they waited. Two people from vastly different worlds united by circumstance and choice. Through the window, dust rose from the approaching vehicles, and the morning sun caught the remnants of smoke still rising from the forest. The sanctuary of the farmhouse had given them a moment to breathe, to understand each other. But as the sound of car doors slamming echoed outside, they both knew the real fight was just beginning. The first sign that these weren't regular security forces came when they split into practiced formations, moving with military precision. John counted 6 men through his rifle scope, all in tactical gear that was too high-end for typical corporate security. Private military contractors, he whispered to Victoria. Your father hired professionals. Recognize any of them? No, but I recognize the training. He shifted position slightly. These aren't guys who'll ask questions first. A burner phone clattered onto the gravel driveway, thrown from the lead vehicle. A voice called out, artificially distorted, Miss Montgomery, let's handle this reasonably. Victoria's grip tightened on the pistol. That's Marcus Kane, head of security. He's been with my father for 20 years. Take the phone. Cooperate. And this ends quietly, Kane continued. Fight, and we burn everything to the ground. Your choice. John watched the men spreading out, covering all angles. They were good, using the farm equipment for cover, maintaining clear lines of fire. But they were also familiar. He'd run similar operations in Afghanistan, which meant he knew the weaknesses. They're expecting us to be desperate, he said, softly, to make mistakes. Victoria nodded, understanding. So we don't give them what they expect. The burner phone rang, its cheap tone incongruous against the tension. Kane's voice carried again. 5 minutes, Miss Montgomery, then we do this the hard way. John touched Victoria's arm, directing her attention to the barn. See that red tractor? Fuel tank's nearly full. If we create a diversion, she finished, while they're focused on the house. He allowed himself a small smile. Working with her felt natural, like they'd been training together for years instead of just meeting hours ago. There's a tunnel in the cellar, Prohibition era, comes out behind the north field. You're full of surprises, farmer. Family's been here a long time, seen a lot of trouble. Victoria checked the pistol's magazine with practiced ease. They'll expect us to run, which is why we don't. Not yet. John reached into his pocket, pulling out a small key ring. We give them a show first. Make them think they know our plan. The phone rang again. 4 minutes. They moved quickly, John outlining the strategy in whispered detail. Victoria absorbed it all, adding her own insights about Kane's tactics and preferences. The sun had risen fully now, casting sharp shadows across the farmyard, a burst of static from the phone. 3 minutes, Miss Montgomery. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. John positioned himself carefully. Ready? Victoria's answer was to squeeze his hand briefly. The touch was unexpected, electric. Their eyes met for a moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Then she was moving, diving toward the back door as John fired 2 precise shots over the contractors' heads. The response was immediate, a hail of bullets forcing him away from the window. "Target's moving!" one of the men shouted. "East side!" John fired again, making it look like he was providing cover for Victoria's escape. The contractors responded, exactly as expected, focusing their attention on the house's east wing. None of them noticed the small device Victoria had planted near the tractor as she'd fled, one of John's remote irrigation detonators, repurposed with deadly efficiency. The explosion wasn't huge, but the fuel tank amplified it perfectly. The fireball sent 2 contractors scrambling, disrupting their carefully planned formation. In the chaos, John and Victoria executed the real plan. Moving as one, they slipped through the cellar door, but instead of taking the tunnel, they circled. Back through the house's ancient stone foundation, they emerged on the west side, exactly where the contractors weren't looking. John's first shot took out their communications array. Victoria, proving her summer camp stories weren't exaggerated, disabled their nearest vehicle with 2 careful rounds to the engine block. "Clever girl," Kane's voice carried through the mayhem. But cleverness isn't enough, not against what's coming. A new sound cut through the gunfire, more helicopters approaching. Not just one this time. "Cellar," John said tersely. "Now." They retreated inside, just as the first helicopter crested the tree line. This time it wasn't just a search vehicle. The military-grade combat helicopter spoke volumes about the resources being deployed against them. In the cellar's dim light, Victoria pulled out the USB drive. "All this for this tiny thing." "Not for the drive," John said, leading her toward the tunnel entrance. "For what it represents, the truth." The cellar shook as the helicopter opened fire, but they were already moving through the tunnel. The real escape wasn't about running away. It was about buying time to figure out their next move, because they both knew that this was just the beginning. The hunters would keep coming, with more men, more firepower, more resources. But for now, they had each other, they had the truth, and they had a fighting chance. The tunnel swallowed them into darkness as the battle for John Cooper's farm raged above. The tunnel emerged into a ravine 1/2 mile from the farm. Victoria blinked in the sudden sunlight, her ears still ringing from the helicopter's assault. Behind them, smoke rose from a new fire, John's barn, burning. "Your farm," she said softly. "I'm so sorry." John's face was unreadable as he watched the smoke. "Buildings can be rebuilt." He pulled out a hand-drawn map from his jacket pocket, wrinkled but detailed. "We need to move. They'll figure out the tunnel soon enough." The map showed terrain that tourists never saw. The real Montana wilderness, marked with notes in faded Inca, John's father's handwriting, Victoria realized, recognizing the same style from the old photos in the farmhouse. "There's a hunting cabin." John traced a route through dense contour lines. "Used to be my grandfather's, about 6 miles north up in the high country. If we can reach it by nightfall, we'll have a chance to plan our next move." Victoria studied the map, committing key features to memory. "And if they find the tunnel, they'll expect us to go east toward the highway." John folded the map carefully. "North is harder terrain, less chance of support. They'll check it eventually, but not first." They moved quickly through the ravine, staying low and using natural cover. Victoria's wrapped feet held up better than expected, though every step was a reminder of their morning ordeal. John set a pace that pushed their limits while remaining sustainable, another military skill put to civilian use. "The cabin?" Victoria asked during a brief water break. "Does anyone else know about it?" "Just family. Dad made sure it stayed." off official records. John offered her some beef jerky from a small emergency pack, said everyone needs a place the world can't find them. Victoria accepted the jerky, their fingers brushing. Wise man. He'd have liked you. The words seemed to surprise John as much as her. He quickly looked away, checking their back trail. They continued in comfortable silence, moving through terrain that grew steadily more challenging. Victoria found herself studying John when he wasn't looking, the way he moved with quiet confidence, how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, the gentle way he helped her over difficult patches without making her feel weak. A distant helicopter passed far to their east. John's prediction had been right. They were searching the wrong area. My father, Victoria said as they climbed a particularly steep slope. He'll have frozen my accounts by now. Put out some story about me having a mental breakdown, probably. Standard. Playbook, right out of the corporate crisis manual. She laughed without humor. Rule 1, control the narrative. They reached the top of the ridge. John oriented himself quickly, pointing to a distant peak. Cabins in that valley. 2 hours, maybe less. Victoria looked back the way they'd come. No sign of pursuit, but the pillars of smoke from both fires, the forest and the farm, marked how much had changed in just a few hours. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "You've lost everything because of me." John was quiet for a long moment. "When I was in Afghanistan, I saw what happens when good people stay quiet, when they convince themselves that fighting the system is hopeless." He met her eyes. "You could have stayed quiet, kept your wealth, your position. Instead, I chose to blow up my entire life." Victoria touched the USB drive through her pocket. "Some would call that stupid. I call it brave." The simple sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. Here was a man who had seen the worst of humanity but still chose to believe in doing right, who had lost his farm, his home, everything he'd built to help a stranger fight for the truth. They started down the other side of the ridge, the valley opening up before them. The mid-afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines, and a cool breeze carried the scent of approaching autumn. "We'll figure it out," John said quietly, helping her over a fallen log. "One step at a time." Victoria squeezed his hand, neither of them acknowledging how natural the contact felt now. They were two people from different worlds, thrown together by circumstance and choice, now linked by something deeper than necessity. The cabin waited ahead, promising temporary sanctuary. But they both knew that the real journey, the fight, for justice, for truth, for something neither of them could yet name, was just beginning. The cabin appeared so suddenly through the trees that Victoria almost missed it. Nature had reclaimed much of the structure, with moss creeping up the logs and wild grapevines threading through the porch railings. But the core was solid. Built to last by people who understood mountain winters, John retrieved an old key from beneath a loose stone in the foundation. "Haven't been here since Dad got sick," he said, working the stiff lock. "But we always kept it ready, just in case." The door opened with a groan of rusty hinges. Inside, furniture sat draped in old sheets, looking like pale ghosts in the dim light. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but beneath it lay the bones of a well-planned shelter. "Solar setup still works," John said, checking a panel of ancient gauges. "Enough for basic power. Water comes from a spring behind the cabin, gravity-fed." Victoria moved through the space, taking in details. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Kitchen basics lined rough wooden shelves. A narrow staircase led to what she assumed was a sleeping loft. Everything was simple, practical, built to serve a purpose. "My grandfather was a cautious man," John explained, pulling sheets off furniture. "Believed in being prepared. After the Depression, he never quite trusted banks or governments again." Victoria ran a finger along a shelf, revealing dark wood beneath the dust. "Smart man." She smiled slightly. "Though I doubt he planned for harboring a billionaire whistleblower. You'd be surprised." John opened a trunk near the fireplace, revealing emergency supplies. He had some interesting views on corporate power, used to say the only difference between robber barons and modern CEOs was the price of their suits. A found can opener became a tool for their late lunch. Canned stew heated over a newly lit fire. They ate in comfortable silence, watching shadows lengthen through grimy windows. The simple food tasted better than any five-star meal Victoria could remember. "We should be safe here for a few days," John said, checking his father's map again. "Time to plan our next move." Victoria pulled out the USB drive, turning it in the firelight. "I have contacts at the Justice Department, people I trust. If we can get this to them, your father's people will be watching them." "Yes." She tucked the drive away. "But they can't watch everyone, and there are still journalists who care about the truth." John stoked the fire, sparks dancing up the chimney. "We'll need to split up eventually, draw their attention different ways." The thought sent an unexpected pang through Victoria's chest. She'd known this man less than a day, but the idea of facing this fight alone suddenly felt hollow. A noise outside made them both freeze. John moved silently to the window, while Victoria took up a position covering the door. Their coordination, automatic now, just a deer moving through the growing dusk. But the moment of tension lingered, reminding them of the reality of their situation. "You should try to rest," John said softly. "I'll take first watch." Victoria started to protest, but exhaustion hit her like a physical wave. The adrenaline that had carried her through the day was fading, leaving bone-deep weariness. The loft held 2 narrow beds. Victoria chose the one farther from the stairs, her security training asserting itself even here. The mattress was thin but clean, and someone, John's mother perhaps, had left quilts that still smelled faintly of cedar. She lay awake, listening to John's quiet movements below. The fire popped and crackled, and wind whispered through. Pine needles outside, so different from her normal world of luxury high-rises and corporate boardrooms. "Thank you," she said softly, knowing he could hear. "For everything." His reply floated up through the darkness. "Get some sleep, Victoria." She closed her eyes, but sleep was elusive. Her mind raced with plans, contingencies, possibilities. The said USB drive pressed against her side, where she'd hidden it in the quilt, its weight far greater than its size. Below, she heard John begin to hum softly, an old country song her privileged upbringing had never included. The simple melody carried peace with it, and she found herself drifting. Her last conscious thought was a realization. For the first time in years, despite the danger and uncertainty, she felt truly, completely safe. The mountain night wrapped around the cabin like a blanket, hiding them from the world that waited to resume its hunt with the dawn. Dawn brought the sound of Victoria's fingers flying across an ancient laptop's keyboard. She'd found it in the cabin's storage, and John had managed to get it running using the solar power. Now she sat at the rough wooden table, her face lit by the blue glow of the screen as she dug through the USB drive's contents. "It's worse than I thought," she said, not looking up as John set a cup of instant coffee beside her. The contamination wasn't just negligence. It was intentional. John leaned over her shoulder, scanning documents that showed years of systematic deception. Why intentionally poison groundwater? Cost. Victoria's voice was tight with anger. The proper disposal of chemical byproducts costs millions. Letting it seep into groundwater and paying off inspectors, mere thousands. She pulled up another file, a spreadsheet tracking cancer rates in communities near Montgomery energy facilities. The numbers told a story that made John's jaw clench. "Your father knew?" "He authorized everything." Victoria opened an email chain that went straight to Charles Montgomery's account. Even had a formula for calculating acceptable civilian casualties against profit margins. The morning light streaming through dusty windows seemed colder now. John had seen evil in war zones, but this was different. Violence wrapped in spreadsheets and corporate memos, killing slowly through poisoned wells and contaminated soil. A notification popped up on the laptop screen, a news alert Victoria had set up. Her father's face filled the window, speaking at a hastily called press conference. "My daughter Victoria has unfortunately suffered a mental break." Charles Montgomery's practiced concern looked genuine even to John. The stress of her corporate responsibilities, combined with recent personal issues, has led to some disturbing behavior and unfounded accusations. Victoria's laugh was bitter. "Personal issues? That's new. Usually he just calls me unstable. The board and I are deeply concerned." "For her safety," Charles continued smoothly, "we've employed private security specialists to locate her and ensure she receives the help she needs." "Private security specialists," John echoed. "Is that what they're calling mercenaries now?" Victoria closed the video and pulled up another document. "Here's why they're really worried. Project Phoenix, a planned expansion into 3 new states, billions in contracts, all dependent on environmental impact studies that would never stand up to real scrutiny." She clicked through more files, geological surveys, health reports, internal memos. A pattern emerged of systematic corruption and calculated destruction, all in service of profit. "Wait," John pointed at a name that appeared repeatedly. "Senator Morrison. Isn't he on the Environmental Protection Committee and chairs the Energy Oversight Board?" Victoria nodded. "Guess who funded his last 3 campaigns? The money trail's all here. Bribes disguised as campaign contributions, offshore accounts, shell companies." A sound outside made them both tense. Just a branch scraping the roof, but it reminded them of their precarious situation. "They'll have traced the laptop's IP by now," Victoria said, beginning to copy key files onto a smaller drive. "Even through the VPN. Time to move, almost." She opened one final document, a detailed organizational chart of Montgomery Energy's shadow operations. "We need to understand what we're really facing." The chart revealed a complex web of shell companies, foreign banks, and private security firms. At the center sat the Montgomery family's private holding company, controlling everything through layers of proxies and cutouts. "Your father built this whole system." Victoria's fingers traced her family name on the screen. 3 generations of Montgomerys. Grandfather laid the groundwork during the energy crisis. Dad perfected it, and she swallowed hard. "I was supposed to inherit it all. Continue the legacy." John touched her shoulder gently. "You chose a different legacy." "Yeah." She managed a small smile. "Guess I'm the family disappointment." The laptop chimed. Another news alert. This time it showed their faces. Missing Iris and armed accomplice sought in corporate theft. John's farm appeared on screen. The burned buildings stark against the morning sky. The reporter spoke about domestic terrorism, about threats to American energy independence, about a disturbed woman and the dangerous man who'd abducted her. "They're rewriting the narrative," Victoria said quietly, "making us the villains." Standard playbook. Page 1. She finished the file transfer and began wiping the laptop. "Next comes the character assassination. They'll dig up everything. Your military record, any marks on your farm's environmental compliance, every parking ticket we've ever gotten." John checked his rifle, more from habit than immediate need. "Let them dig. Truth's still truth." "Truth's expensive," Victoria countered, but her voice held steel beneath the fatigue. "And we're up against people who buy truth wholesale." The laptop screen went dark as she finished erasing their digital footprints. Outside, clouds were gathering over the mountains, promising afternoon storms. They needed to move soon, but first they needed a plan, because now they knew this wasn't just about one company's crimes. They were challenging an entire system of power and privilege, of wealth that bought immunity from consequences. The question was, how do you fight an enemy that owns the battlefield? The storm broke over the mountains with biblical fury. Rain drummed against the cabin's roof as John and Victoria sat on opposite sides of the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. A simple gold ring spun between John's fingers, a nervous habit he hadn't indulged in years. "Sarah," he said quietly, answering Victoria's unasked question about the ring. "My wife, ex-wife. She couldn't handle—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing the farm, the isolation, the memories of war that had followed him home. Victoria watched the ring catch firelight. "How long?" 5 years since the divorce. 7 since I came back from my last tour. The ring stopped spinning. She wanted city life, career opportunities. Said the farm was killing her soul. And you couldn't leave. Wouldn't. John's voice held old pain. "This land, it's not just property, it's legacy," Victoria finished. "Like my family's company was supposed to be mine." Thunder rolled overhead, and the wind found new gaps in the cabin's aged walls. Victoria pulled her borrowed jacket tighter, watching John carefully return the ring to a chain around his neck. "The thing about legacy," she continued, "is that sometimes honoring it means breaking it. Breaking yourself." John nodded slowly. "Dad understood that. Why I enlisted, even though it meant leaving the farm. Said sometimes you have to leave home to know why it matters." A particularly violent gust rattled the windows. Victoria rose to check the laptop one last time before. They'd need to destroy it. The screen showed a new press release, a $1 million reward for information leading to her safe return. "They're getting desperate," she said. $1 million will have every bounty hunter in 3 states looking for us. Money talks. Money screams. Victoria shut the laptop with more force than necessary. Money drowns out everything else. Truth, justice, basic human decency. John watched her pace the small room, saw the weight of her family's sins pressing down on her shoulders. "Your mother," he said softly. "The locket you wear. Tell me about her." Victoria's hand went to the silver locket automatically. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, Claire Montgomery. She was different. Married into the family but never really bought into the mythology. Used to take me to the communities near our facilities, showed me the real cost of our wealth. She opened the locket, revealing a small photo. "She died when I was 12, brain cancer. No direct link to our operations, but you wonder every day." Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "The worst part, Dad seemed genuinely devastated. Funded a whole cancer research wing at Mayo Clinic in her name, while continuing to poison other people's mothers." John stood, crossing to her. Without thinking, he took her hand. "People contain multitudes. Doesn't excuse it, just makes it more human, more tragic." Victoria looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. The firelight softened his features, but couldn't hide the understanding in his eyes. Here was a man who knew about duty and sacrifice, about choosing between what's right and what's easy. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words barely audible above the storm. "Not of them, not really. I'm scared that after all this nothing will change, that money and power will win, like they always do." John's grip tightened. "Then we make them fight for it. Every step, every dollar, every lie, we make it cost them more than they're willing to pay." A crack of lightning illuminated the cabin, throwing their shadows against the far wall. 2 figures standing close, connected by joined hands and shared purpose. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Victoria stepped closer, her free hand rising, to touch the chain that held his wedding ring. "We've both lost things," she said softly. "Both carry weights we didn't choose. Maybe that's why we found each other." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Outside, the storm raged on, but in that moment, in that tiny cabin at the edge of civilization, something shifted. Trust became something more, something deeper. Victoria's fingers traced from the ring to his jaw, and John's breath caught. They were close enough now to share warmth, to feel the electric tension that had been building since that morning in the burning forest. But before either could move, a sound cut through the storm. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors, the helicopter's searchlight cut through the storm like a blade, sweeping the mountainside in methodical patterns. John and Victoria moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, gathering only what they couldn't leave behind. "They're using thermal imaging," John said, checking the storm's intensity through a window. "But this rain will help. Masks, heat signatures." Victoria finished wiping the laptop, then smashed its hard drive. "Time to change the game," she said, pulling a small camera from her jacket pocket, the kind used for corporate surveillance, lifted from one of Kane's men during their escape. "They're not the only ones who can gather intelligence," John raised an eyebrow, impressed. "When did you, while you were covering our retreat? Old corporate habit, always secure evidence." A plan formed quickly between them, born of shared desperation and complementary skills. The helicopter was moving in a standard search pattern, which meant the ground teams would be here and here. John marked points on his father's map. Standard military protocol. They'll set up blocking positions along likely escape routes. Victoria studied the terrain. "So we give them what they expect. Let them think they're herding us, while we circle behind them." John's smile was grim. "Hit their command and control." They moved fast, using the storm as cover. The helicopter's search pattern had revealed more than its pilots knew, showing exactly where they didn't expect their quarry to be. John led them through brutal terrain, the kind that would have broken less determined people. Victoria kept pace without complaint, though her wrapped feet must have been screaming. They reached a ridgeline overlooking a small valley, where light glowed from a hastily established command post, 3 vehicles and a portable communications array. "Kane will be there," Victoria whispered, rainwater streaming down her face. "He never trusts operations to subordinates." John handed her his binoculars. Through the rain, they could make out figures moving with military precision. At the center stood Marcus Kane, his expensive suit exchanged for tactical gear. 8 men plus Kane, John counted. Armed and professional, but they're not expecting resistance. "Not here." Victoria's hand found his in the darkness. "We can't take them head on." "We don't need to." John squeezed her hand once before letting go. "We just need their communications and their intel." The storm provided perfect cover for their approach. John moved like a ghost through the underbrush, his years of combat experience serving them well. Victoria matched his movements, her corporate stealth training proving surprisingly applicable to actual covert operations. They positioned themselves above the command post, where a rocky outcrop provided both cover and a clear view of the operation. Kane's voice carried through the rain as he coordinated his teams. "Grid 7 clear. Check the ranger station next." "No, the father's alive but contained." "Yes, sir, I understand the time pressure." Victoria's breath caught at the mention of her father. John touched her arm gently, steadying her. They had a mission. Emotions could wait. The camera Victoria had stolen proved to be a blessing. As Kane's men coordinated their search, she recorded everything. Faces, tactical plans, evidence of military-grade hardware being used against civilians. Every second of footage was ammunition for later. But the real prize came when Kane received a video call. Victoria positioned the camera perfectly as her father's face filled Kane's tablet screen. "This ends tonight." Charles Montgomery's voice was clear despite the rain. "The board meets at 9 a.m. By then, I need this situation resolved." "Understood, sir." "And the farmer? Collateral damage?" "The story's already written. Unstable veteran, history of PTSD, tragic ending. The media will eat it up." John felt. Victoria tensed beside him. Her fingers dug into his arm, but her camera hand remained steady, capturing every damning word. The call ended, and Kane began issuing new orders. The helicopter's searchlight swung closer to their position. "Time to go," John breathed. But Victoria wasn't done. While Kane was distracted, she carefully accessed their communications array through a back door she'd installed years ago. Standard corporate procedure, now turned against them. Within seconds, she'd copied their tactical data and inserted a virus that would scramble their communications within hours. They retreated as silently as they'd approached, the storm covering their tracks. Only when they were safely away did Victoria allow herself to shake. "My father," she whispered. "He really means to—" "Hey!" John pulled her close, offering warmth against the rain and something more. "We got what we needed. Now we use it." Victoria straightened, steel returning to her spine. The scared heiress was gone, replaced by a warrior with a mission. "Kane's good, but he thinks like military. He's not ready for corporate warfare." "And your father?" "He thinks money solves everything." She held up the camera, her smile fierce. "Let's show him what truth costs." They moved through the storm, 2 hunters now instead of prey. The next few hours would determine everything, and they had surprised their enemies with something unexpected. Hope. The Montgomery Energy Solutions headquarters rose 60 stories above downtown Helena, its glass exterior reflecting the pre-dawn sky like a mountain of ice. Victoria stood in the shadows of a service entrance, her borrowed clothes exchanged for a perfectly tailored business suit, courtesy of an all-night dry cleaner who'd asked no questions of her corporate credit line. "Security protocols haven't changed," she whispered into a concealed phone. "Arrogance works in our favor." "Just like you said it would," John's voice came through clearly. He was positioned nearby with the rifle, covering her approach. "You sure about this?" Victoria touched her employee ID badge. Still active, another oversight born of corporate hubris. "The board meets in 30 minutes. Father always schedules critical meetings at dawn. Says it separates the serious players from the pretenders. And Kane, still in the mountains, chasing ghosts." She allowed herself a small smile. Amazing how unreliable communications equipment can become in bad weather. The service entrance lock clicked open under her badge. 7 years on the board had taught her every back door, every blind spot in the security system. Now those lessons would serve a different purpose. "Remember," John's voice was soft but intense. "At the first sign of trouble, I get out, I know." Victoria checked her reflection in the dark glass. She looked exactly like the corporate heiress she'd been 3 days ago. Only her eyes were different, harder, more determined. But that's not how this ends. She moved through familiar corridors, her heels clicking on marble floors. Early morning cleaning staff nodded respectfully. To them, she was still Miss Montgomery, the CEO's daughter. Nobody questioned her presence. The executive elevator required both badge and biometric scan. For a moment, Victoria feared they might have deactivated her access, but the doors opened smoothly. Her father's confidence that she wouldn't dare return would be his undoing. "I'm in position," she murmured into the phone. "Board members?" "Arriving now," John confirmed, watching through his scope from his hidden vantage point. "Black cars, private security. Your father just pulled up." Victoria's hand tightened on her purse, feeling the weight of the camera and USB drive. Everything they needed to bring down an empire, contained in such a small space. The elevator opened, directly into the boardroom antechamber. Martha, her father's executive assistant for 20 years, looked up in shock. "Ms. Montgomery, your father said you were taking a brief wellness retreat?" Victoria's smile was pure corporate ice. "Plans change, Martha. The board's gathering." "Yes, but perfect." Victoria moved past her with practiced authority. "Please hold all calls. This morning's presentation requires everyone's full attention." She could hear voices from the board. A room, the familiar mix of fake camaraderie and barely concealed ambition. These were the people who'd helped build her father's empire of corruption. Now they would help tear it down. "Cameras are looped," John's voice came through her earpiece. "Security won't see anything until it's too late." Victoria touched her father's ring through her jacket, a gift on her first day as VP, now serving. As a reminder of everything she was about to destroy. "Thank you, John, for everything. Just be careful. These people, I know what they're capable of." She took a deep breath. "That's why we have to stop them." The boardroom doors opened. Smoothly, 12 faces turned toward her. Shock, confusion, and in her father's case, carefully controlled rage. Victoria. Charles Montgomery's voice was perfectly modulated, betraying nothing. "This is a pleasant surprise. We were all so worried." Sure you were, Father." Victoria moved to the head of the table, his position a deliberate provocation. "Worried enough to send armed men to ensure my safety," murmurs from the board members. Her father's smile never wavered. "You're unwell, dear. We can discuss this privately." "Actually," Victoria connected her drive to the presentation system, "this needs an audience. After all, isn't that what board meetings are for? Transparency, accountability." The screens around the room lit up with damning evidence. Emails, reports, photographs of contaminated sites. Behind them, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sun began to rise over Montana, painting the sky in shades of fire. Charles Montgomery's mask finally cracked. "Security won't come." Victoria's voice was steel. "Amazing how unreliable communications can become. Rather like contaminated water supplies, wouldn't you say, Father?" The boardroom erupted into chaos as decades of careful corruption began to unravel. Outside, John watched through his scope as the carefully constructed facade of corporate power started to crumble. The morning sun rose fully, and with it, the truth. Sheriff Emma Reeves had served Montana's Clayton County for 15 years, long enough to know when something wasn't right. The official story about John Cooper, decorated veteran turned unstable kidnapper, had struck her as wrong from the start. Now, watching the chaos unfold at Montgomery Energy's headquarters through the windows of her patrol car, she knew her instincts had been correct. "Got movement on the south exit," her deputy radioed. "Private security's trying to remove files." "Stop them," Emma ordered, checking her weapon. "County has jurisdiction now." She'd known John Cooper since he'd returned from Afghanistan. Quiet man, honest farmer, exactly the kind of neighbor these mountains had always attracted. When his farm burned, she'd smelled the accelerant. When corporate security tried to take over the investigation, she'd seen the corruption. Now, watching Victoria Montgomery's evidence spread across every screen in the building, Emma finally had what she needed: probable cause. The sheriff's badge glinted as she strode through the lobby, past surprised security guards who didn't dare stop her. Local law enforcement might seem quaint to corporate power, but in Clayton County, her authority was absolute. "Ma'am," a security guard stepped forward, This is a crime scene." Emma's voice carried the weight of mountain justice, "and you're interfering with a criminal investigation." Upstairs, the boardroom had descended into controlled chaos. Victoria Montgomery stood at its center, directing the storm she'd unleashed. Her father had been quietly detained by 2 deputies, his carefully manicured hands cuffed behind his expensive suit. "Sheriff." Victoria's relief at seeing Emma was genuine. "Thank you for coming. Figured it was time." Emma surveyed the scene. The board members trying to delete files, others attempting to contact lawyers. "John?" "Safe. Covering our exit." Emma nodded. She'd already positioned deputies to protect him. The local authorities might be outgunned by corporate mercenaries, but they knew every trail and hollow in these mountains. "Ms. Montgomery," one of the board members stood, straightening his tie. "Surely we can discuss this reasonably. The economic impact of these allegations." "Impact?" Victoria's laugh was sharp. "Let's discuss impact. Sheriff, would you show them?" Emma connected her own device to the presentation system. Images filled the screens. Local children with mysterious illnesses, contaminated wells, medical reports that had been buried by corporate lawyers. "Clayton County's been keeping records," the sheriff said quietly, "waiting for someone brave enough to help us prove it." Outside, more patrol cars arrived. State police, FBI agents Emma had quietly contacted overnight. The net was closing. "Your private security forces," Emma continued, "crossed county lines with military-grade weapons, conducted illegal surveillance. Attempted murder. We had authorization, Charles Montgomery began. Federal authorization. Emma's smile was cold. Which is interesting, since I have Senator Morrison in custody downstairs, singing a very different tune. Victoria's evidence had given them the thread. Emma's local connections had unraveled the whole sweater. Years of corporate corruption were crashing down, and Clayton County was leading the charge. More cars pulled into the parking lot, news vans, their satellite dishes reaching skyward. Emma's deputies had made sure select journalists got the tip. Your father's security chief, Marcus Kane. Emma turned to Victoria. We found him and his team up in the mountains. Seems their communications failed at a crucial moment. They walked right into a state police roadblock. Charles Montgomery's facade finally cracked. You don't understand what you're doing. The jobs, the economy, we understand perfectly. The new voice came from John Cooper, entering with 2 FBI agents. His rifle was gone, but he carried himself with military bearing. People aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. The morning sun now filled the boardroom, reflecting off glass and chrome. Outside, more locals arrived, farmers, ranchers, families affected by the contamination. Word had spread through the rural grapevine, bringing witnesses and supporters. Clayton. County takes care of its own, Emma said, watching Victoria cross to stand beside John. All of its own. The arrests took hours. Every board member, every complicit executive, teams of forensic accountants descended on the building, securing decades of evidence. But it was the local deputies who led Charles Montgomery out in handcuffs, past the cameras and the growing crowd. Victoria watched from the window, John's solid presence beside her. I never expected all of this. Small communities, Emma joined them, have long memories and longer grudges. The morning light caught Victoria's mother's locket, still hanging around her neck. Below, the crowd had begun to disperse, heading back to farms and ranches. Regular people who'd stood up against corporate power, led by a billionaire's daughter who'd chosen truth over privilege. What happens now? John asked quietly. Emma's badge caught the sunlight. Now? Now we make sure justice isn't just a word. In a corporate mission statement, the mountains rose behind them, ancient and unchanging, but in their shadow, something had shifted. Power had met its match in the unlikely alliance of rural justice and corporate conscience. And Clayton County would never be quite the same. Snow fell on Montana like forgiveness, covering the scars of autumn's fires. 3 weeks had passed since the arrests at Montgomery Energy, and winter had come early to the mountains. Victoria stood on the porch of John's half-rebuilt farmhouse, watching ice crystals dance in the morning light. Her mother's locket felt heavy against her chest, frosted with condensation from her breath. Inside, she knew, John was on the phone with contractors, rebuilding plans delayed by the sudden storm. "You'll freeze out here," his voice came from behind her, followed by the weight of a heavy blanket around her shoulders. Just thinking. She turned to face him, noting the worry lines around his eyes. The board's offering a deal. John's jaw tightened. They'd been expecting this. Corporate damage control. Trying to contain the scandal. How bad? They want me to take over as CEO. Victoria's laugh clouded in the frigid air. Clean up the company's image. Show stockholders that the Montgomery name still stands for something. And your father? Resigned in disgrace, private exile, probably Switzerland. She pulled the blanket tighter. They're willing to implement all the environmental reforms, fund cleanup efforts. Everything I wanted. John studied her face, reading the conflict there. These weeks together had taught them each other's silences. But it means playing their game again. Corporate politics. Boardroom battles. Victoria gestured at the snow-covered mountains. Leaving all this. The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken things. They'd grown closer during the rebuilding, sharing meals in the half-finished kitchen, planning repairs side by side. Something had bloomed in the aftermath of crisis, fragile as the first spring flowers. The farm needs work, John said carefully, but it's not going anywhere. John! A sound cut through the morning stillness. Helicopter rotors, distant but growing closer. They both tensed, muscle memory from those desperate days still sharp. County Sheriff. John identified the approaching aircraft. Emma said she'd bring the final paperwork. The helicopter landed in the cleared field, snow swirling in its wake. Sheriff Reeves emerged, clutching a thick folder and looking grim. "We've got trouble," she called over the dying rotors. "Kane escaped custody." The news hit like a physical blow. Marcus Kane had been their most dangerous adversary, a man who combined military expertise with corporate ruthlessness. "How?" Victoria demanded. "Professional job, 2 guards dead." Emma handed over surveillance photos. He had help, expensive help. John studied the images. "He's coming here." It wasn't a question. They all knew Kane's type. Men who took failure personally, who couldn't let go of a mission once it was. "Set. I've got deputies on the way," Emma said. "State police too, but this storm will slow them down." John was already moving, checking sight lines, defensive positions. "How long?" "Hour, maybe less." Emma's radio crackled with updates. "Roadblocks are up, but in this weather..." Victoria touched her mother's locket, ice cold against her palm. "He won't come by road." "No," John agreed. "He'll come through the high country, use the storm for cover." Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. This was their fight to finish. "I need to get back, coordinate with State," Emma said. "But reinforcements are coming. Just hold out. We'll manage." John's voice held the quiet confidence that had first drawn Victoria to him. "Thanks, Emma." The sheriff hesitated, then pulled something from her jacket, her personal backup weapon. "Just in case. I'll deny ever giving it to you." After Emma left, they moved quickly to prepare. John had rebuilt with defense in mind. Clear fields of fire, reinforced walls, escape routes. Now those precautions would be tested. "You should go with Emma," he said, checking ammunition. "Get clear before..." Victoria silenced him with a kiss. It was their first, born of weeks of growing feelings and the sharp edge of danger. When they parted, her eyes held fire despite the freezing air. "I'm done running," she said softly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." John touched her face gently, calloused fingers tracing her cheek. The simple gesture held more meaning than any corporate contract, any boardroom deal. Above them, the storm intensified. Ice crystals turned to stinging pellets, driven by mountain winds. Somewhere in that whiteness, a killer was coming, a man who represented everything they'd fought against, but this time they weren't surprised or unprepared. This time, they had something worth fighting for, not just justice or truth, but the future taking shape between them. The ice storm raged, but in John Cooper's farmhouse, 2 people had found their own kind of fire. The farmhouse deed lay on the kitchen table between them, its edges curling from age. John had found it while reinforcing the walls, his great-grandfather's original claim to this land, preserved between layers of wallpaper. 4 generations, he said, positioning another steel plate behind the drywall. Built everything from scratch. Victoria studied the document while checking sightlines through newly installed bulletproof windows, a rushed delivery from a manufacturer who hadn't asked questions. "Your great-grandfather had vision and stubbornness. Valley flooded his first year here, lost everything. John secured the plate with practiced efficiency, built it all back, higher ground, better foundation. Like we're doing now." Their eyes met across the room. The past weeks had changed them both. Victoria's corporate polish softened by manual labor, John's soldier's vigilance tempered by her presence. They'd rebuilt together, learning each other's strengths, fitting together like puzzle pieces neither had known were missing. A metallic click drew their attention. The emergency radio Emma had left them crackled to life. "Storms intensifying. Roads above 7,000 feet are impassable. All units be advised." John checked his watch. "Kane will use the weather. Come in from above, where reinforcements can't follow." Victoria moved to the gun cabinet, once his father's, now restored and reinforced. Inside, their weapons lay ready. John's rifle, Emma's backup piece, tactical gear salvaged from their previous encounters. The environmental cleanup crews arrive. "Tomorrow," she said, checking magazines with practiced hands. "New wells for 3 communities, medical screening programs, soil rehabilitation." "Kane won't let that happen." John's voice was grim. "He's got too many corporate secrets to protect." "It's not just about secrets anymore." Victoria loaded Emma's pistol, the weight familiar now. "It's about pride, control." The wind howled outside, driving snow against windows designed to stop bullets. Somewhere in that whiteness, a killer moved through terrain he knew almost as well as John. Almost. They'd spent the hours since Emma's warning preparing. Every approach was covered, every room prepared for defense or retreat. The original farmhouse had burned, but its replacement was a fortress, albeit one that looked like a simple Montana home. Victoria touched the deed again, fingers tracing faded signatures. "Your family built this place to last. Our family." The words slipped out before John could catch them. He stilled, uncertain, but Victoria was crossing the room, closing the distance between them. Her kiss held promise and certainty, warmth against the gathering storm. "Our family," she agreed softly, "if we survive this." A sound cut through the wind, faint but distinctive to trained ears. The crunch of snow under careful feet. They moved apart smoothly, taking pre-planned positions. The farmhouse's layout, originally simple, had been redesigned with combat in mind. Every room connected, offering multiple escape routes. Every window provided overlapping fields of fire. "Multiple targets," John whispered, watching through his scope. "Kane's not alone." Victoria clicked her radio once. Their signal to Emma. That contact was imminent. The sheriff would try to get help through, but in this weather— 4 men, she counted, using the thermal imaging system they'd installed. Moving in pairs. Kane's not with them. "No." John's voice held certainty. "He's watching, waiting for them to draw us out." The first shots came as darkness fell, probing fire, testing their defenses. John and Victoria held their positions, conserving ammunition, watching thermal signatures. Move through the storm. A massive explosion rocked the barn, their old refuge now sacrificed as a distraction. In the chaos, 2 figures rushed the house's east side. Victoria's shot dropped the first man. John's rifle cracked once, and the second fell. Clean, efficient, just as they'd practiced. But Kane was still out there, and now he knew they were ready. "For him, you've learned, Victoria." His voice carried through the storm, location impossible to pinpoint. "Corporate princess playing soldier. Daddy would be so proud." "Funny," she called back, changing position smoothly. "I was just thinking how disappointed your corporate masters must be. Can't even eliminate one whistleblower." The taunt drew more fire, exactly as planned. Each shot revealed more about their attackers' positions, their patterns, their weaknesses. Through it all, the deed remained on the kitchen table, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Not just survival now, but future, legacy, the chance to build something new from the ashes of what had burned. Snow continued to fall as night deepened, coating everything in white. Somewhere in that swirling darkness, Marcus Kane was preparing. His real attack. The men he'd sent were just the prelude, but in the farmhouse built by generations of Coopers, now defended by an unlikely partnership of soldier and heiress, the light burned steady. And in that light, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, prepared to make their stand. The real battle was about to begin. The ancient rifle that had hung above John's fireplace for 3 generations spoke with authority, its report echoing through the storm-racked night. Another of Kane's men fell, snow turning crimson beneath him. 4 down, John muttered, working. The bolt action smoothly. "But not the one that matters." Victoria's voice came through their radio link, steady despite the tension. "Movement on the North Ridge. Single figure, moving fast. Kane. John shifted position, tracking through his scope. He's done testing us. The attack, when it came, was masterful. Multiple explosions rocked the farmhouse's foundations, charges Kane's advance team must have planted while drawing their fire. Smoke poured through broken windows as Kane's remaining men launched a coordinated assault. But John and Victoria had prepared for this. The farmhouse's reinforced walls held, and pre-positioned sprinklers handled the smoke. They moved through their killing house like dancers in a deadly ballet, covering each other with practiced precision. "You disappoint me, Victoria," Kane's voice carried through the chaos. "All that corporate training, all those resources, wasted on misplaced idealism." Victoria's response was two careful shots that dropped another mercenary. "Funny, I was just thinking how much you've disappointed my father. Can't even silence one whistleblower?" A shadow moved through the smoke, Kane himself, finally engaging. His first shot nearly caught John, shattering a reinforced window. His second drove Victoria to cover behind a steel-reinforced wall. "It was never about silencing you," Kane called out. "It was about maintaining order, the system your family built that keeps the world turning. A system built on poison and lies." Victoria rolled to a new position, narrowly avoiding Kane's fire. On treating people like numbers in a spreadsheet, John moved silently through the house's upper level, using the chaos below as cover. Kane was good, military-trained, corporate-funded, driven by pride and professional reputation. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He thought he was still fighting a corporate princess and a simple farmer. The truth exploded through a broken window as John swung down on a prepared line, boots connecting solidly with Kane's chest. They went, down together, rolling in the snow and broken glass. Kane was stronger, but John had been fighting in close quarters since Afghanistan. They traded brutal blows, neither able to bring their weapons to bear. Blood stained the snow, John's from a cut above his eye, Kane's from a split lip. "You could have had everything." Kane spat, landing a solid punch. "Both of you. Money or power, respect." "We chose something better," John growled, catching Kane's next strike and twisting. "We chose the truth." A shot rang out. Kane staggered, red blooming on his shoulder. Victoria stood in a shattered doorway, Emma's pistol steady in her hands. "And we chose each other," she added quietly. But Kane wasn't finished. With his good arm, he pulled a device from his tactical vest. A detonator. His thumb hovered over the trigger. "Insurance policy," he gasped. "Enough explosives to level everything. Your precious farm, your future, all of it. Gone with one push." John and Victoria's eyes met across the blood-stained snow. In that moment, they shared the same thought. Some things were worth sacrificing. Everything for. They moved together, as if they'd planned it. Victoria's shot forced Kane to dodge right, directly into John's tackle. They slammed into a snowbank, the detonator flying from Kane's grip. Victoria dove for the device while John and Kane grappled. Her fingers closed around it just as Kane broke free, drawing a hidden blade. "Victoria." John's warning came as Kane lunged, blade glinting in the darkness. The old rifle spoke one final time. Kane's body jerked, then collapsed. Behind him stood Sheriff Emma Reeves, rifle smoking in the snowy air. "Sorry I'm late," she said dryly. Weather was hell. State police vehicles were arriving now, their lights painting the snow in red and blue. Medical teams rushed to treat the wounded mercenaries. But John and Victoria had eyes only for each other. They met in the middle of the battlefield their farm had become. Victoria still clutched the detonator, her knuckles white. John's face was bloody, but his eyes were clear. "Still think this is better than a corner office?" he asked softly. Victoria's laugh was shaky but real. She dropped the detonator in the snow and pulled him close. "Better than anything." They kissed as the storm began to ease, dawn's first light touching the mountains. Around them, law enforcement processed the scene, medics treated the wounded, and Emma coordinated with state authorities. But in that moment, they were alone in their own world. They had fought for truth, for justice, for the right of people, to live without poison in their water and lies in their hearts. And they had won more than just the battle. They had won a future, built on foundations stronger than corporate power or family legacy. They had won the right to write their own story. Spring came early to Montana that year. The last snow melted to reveal green shoots pushing through soil that was, for the first time in decades, certified clean. Victoria stood at the farmhouse window, watching environmental teams test the groundwater of a neighboring property. All clear, she read from the latest report. Third clean test this week. John looked up from where he was installing new kitchen cabinets. The Mitchell place? Their wells safe now. Victoria smiled, remembering the family's tears of joy. Their daughter can finally swim in the creek again. The farmhouse restoration was nearly complete. They'd rebuilt it together, incorporating the best of old and new. Solar panels alongside handcrafted woodwork, high-tech security, subtle enough to look like simple farm equipment. A new business card sat on the counter, its design elegant, but understated. Cooper Montgomery Environmental Trust. Their solution to the board's offer had surprised everyone except themselves. Latest funding came through, Victoria continued, setting down the report. 3 more cleanup sites approved. And your father? Switzerland, last I heard. She touched her mother's locket, now containing a small photo of them both. The board accepted his formal resignation. The company's in trust now, with oversight. Committees for every major decision. John crossed to her, hands still dusty from his work. Any regrets about giving up corporate power? Victoria leaned into him. None. This is better. We're actually helping people, not just talking about it in boardrooms. The trust was their compromise, a way to use Montgomery resources for real change while maintaining independence. They funded environmental cleanup, medical care for affected communities, and legal support for other whistleblowers. Emma's patrol car pulled up outside, right on schedule. The sheriff had become a regular visitor, helping coordinate between local needs and corporate resources. Brought those permits you needed, Emma called, climbing the porch steps, and some news about Kane. They settled in the new kitchen where coffee was always ready for friends. The permits were for additional well-testing sites. The news about Kane was equally satisfying. He'd taken a plea deal, turning evidence against other corporate mercenaries. His testimony opened up 3 more cases, Emma reported. Similar environmental crimes, different companies. The dams. Breaking. Good. John poured more coffee. People deserve to know what's in their water. Victoria watched him, still amazed at how naturally he'd adapted to their new role. The quiet farmer had become a powerful advocate for rural communities. His military precision now turned to project planning and resource allocation. There's more, Emma said. Remember those cancer clusters we documented? CDC's launching a full investigation. Your data helped push it through. Victory came in small steps. Clean wells, healthy children, communities empowered to fight back against corporate negligence. But those steps were adding up to real change. After Emma left, they walked the property together, a daily ritual that helped them appreciate their progress. The new barn gleamed in the spring sunshine. Fields lay ready for planting, and everywhere testing equipment monitored the land's healing. Got word from the Mitchell boy, John said as they reached the repaired fence line. He's planning to study environmental science, wants to help other communities fight back. Victoria squeezed his hand. Legacy comes in different forms. They'd learned that lesson together. The true legacy wasn't about names on buildings or numbers in bank accounts. It was about the lives you touched, the changes you inspired, the truth you defended. The sun was setting when they returned to the farmhouse, painting the mountains in shades of gold. Inside, their shared office held maps marking contaminated sites, files of evidence for ongoing cases, and plans for future projects. But it also held simpler things, photos of them working together, thank you letters from families, small victories celebrated. A different kind of wealth than Victoria had grown up with, but infinitely more valuable. "Still think your grandfather would approve?" she asked, watching John study their latest project plans. His smile was answer enough. They had built something new here, a partnership of purpose, a love born of shared values, a future that honored the best of both their pasts, and they were just getting started. 1 year to the day after Victoria had been chained to an oak tree in a burning forest, she stood in the same spot, though everything had changed. The forest had renewed itself, young growth pushing through the ashes. Like the land, she too had been transformed by fire. "Ready?" John's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him in a suit that somehow looked natural, despite his usual farmer's attire. Almost, just paying respects to where it all began. They'd chosen this date deliberately for the opening of the Cooper Montgomery Environmental Research Center. The facility, built on a corner of their land, would serve as both laboratory and training ground for a new generation of environmental defenders. The morning light caught Victoria's engagement ring, a simple band that had once belonged to John's mother. No diamonds, no corporate excess, just honest gold and the promise it represented. "Crowds gathering," John said softly. "Emma's got everyone organized. The ceremony would be small by corporate standards, but significant in its own way. Local families, environmental activists, sympathetic journalists, and even a few reformed board members would witness the beginning of something new." They walked together through the renewed forest. The path was different now, not the desperate route they'd taken that first morning, but a carefully maintained trail that would let others see both destruction and renewal. "My father sent a message," Victoria said as they walked, "through his lawyers." John's hand found hers. "And he's dying. Cancer." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Wants to make amends," he says. "Offers to testify about other companies' violations." "What will you do?" Victoria touched her mother's locket. "Visit him. Listen, not for him, but for all the families who deserve answers." They emerged from the trees to find the ceremony site transformed. Simple chairs faced a podium made from reclaimed wood. Behind it stood the research center, a building that balanced modern technology with environmental harmony. Emma met them at the edge of the gathering. The sheriff's badge gleamed against her dress uniform. "Everything's ready, and you've got some surprise guests." Through the crowd, Victoria spotted familiar faces, farmers whose land they'd helped restore, children who could swim in clean creeks again, scientists who'd joined their cause. But there were new faces too, carrying hope instead of desperation. The ceremony itself was brief but powerful. Victoria spoke about corporate responsibility and personal choice. John talked about legacy and stewardship of the land. Together, they outlined their vision for the future, not just cleaning up past damage, but preventing new destruction. "1 year ago," Victoria concluded, "I thought I was going to die in these woods. Instead, I found a new way to live. We all have that choice, to look away from hard truths or to face them, to accept corruption or to fight it." John took her hand as they cut the ribbon together. The gesture was symbolic, but like everything they did now, it carried real weight. The research center would train people to detect contamination, document violations, and empower communities to defend themselves. After the ceremony, they walked the property together, their daily ritual now shared with others who understood its importance. The testing equipment hummed, monitoring the land's healing. In the distance, their farmhouse stood proud, rebuilt and renewed. "You know," John said as they reached their favorite viewpoint, "when I was a kid, my father told me that land remembers, holds on to both the good and the bad we do to it." Victoria watched a family of deer emerge from the forest edge, nature reclaiming its space. "What do you think this land will remember about us? That we chose to heal it." He pulled her close. "That we turned poison into purpose." The sun was setting now, painting the mountains in familiar gold. But unlike that desperate morning a year ago, they weren't running from anything. They had built something solid here, a partnership, a purpose, a future that honored both their pasts while charting a new course. A breeze carried the scent of pine and new growth, of soil finally healing after decades of abuse. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more sights to clean, more battles to fight, more truths to defend, but they would face them together, the unlikely pair who had found each other in fire and forged something stronger than corporate power or family legacy. They had found their truth, their purpose, their home, and in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all.